Hey Spare Parts Army, I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. Earlier this month, the US Air Force revealed majestic footage of the world's first sixth-generation aircraft, the B-21, at a much-anticipated event that looked like the Oscars for stealth bombers. But was it really created in just 8 years by Northrop Grumman? Or did the Pentagon's top-secret classified black budget help move its production along in the shadows? The B-21 Raider promises to completely change the US strategic bombing strategy against China. With an estimated unit price of approximately $700 million, the new bomber costs about the same as the Empire State Building and took a team of 8,000 engineers using 400 different suppliers across 40 different states to manufacture. Let's analyze everything we know about the B-21's new weapon systems, stealth technology, planned tactics, and whether or not China's new air defense systems can hope to shoot it down. But first, today's partner, Crossout, is a free-to-play online vehicle shooter for PC and console systems including PS5, Xbox X, and S series. Crossout is the game where all vehicles are player-made, endless combinations. You can really get creative with a huge arsenal of parts to choose from. I've seen players use chainsaws, power drills, explosive lances, anti-gravity devices, and literally so much more. I personally think the advanced vehicle damage model is very cool because it lets you shoot off individual parts from an enemy's vehicle. There's nothing like ramping into an area filled with enemies, creating utter chaos, and limping out missing 2 to 3 wheels. I personally love customizing my own vehicles and using high-powered cannons to shoot off entire components from unsuspecting enemies. All the different options means every game is different and each match is truly just a fun and unique experience. I can't think of another game with the same level of varied and interesting gameplay. Join me in Crossout for free and follow my link to get the game, as well as an exclusive bonus, the unique pixel paint, as well as the choice between a selection of 3 weapons and a powerful vehicle cabin. Support the channel by playing Crossout for free today. Officially, development of the B-21 Raider began as a classified program in 2011, but we can actually trace the development story much further back. In the mid-1980s, when the B-2 Spirit bomber was still in its early prototyping stage, it was codenamed Senior Ice. At the time, the design engineers at Northrop Grumman never planned to give it its trademark sawtooth, bat-like trailing edge that it ended up having. They instead wanted the B-2 to look and function much more like how the B-21 bomber appears today. Why did they change the shape so drastically? Because the US Air Force Command were concerned the Soviet Union had already developed new radar technology that would alert their fighter jets to scramble in time to catch up with the B-2 bomber. The Air Force thought this would force the B-2 bomber to have to dive down to low altitudes, but the B-2 wasn't designed for smooth flight at low altitudes. Northrop was forced to call in experts from around the country to try to create a complete redesign. They ended up adding the larger aft-end flight controls that appear to be missing from the new B-21 bomber. According to aviation expert Tyler Rodgeway at the Warzone, he believes this decision ultimately made the aircraft heavier, more expensive, less stealthy in certain radar bandwidths, and it dropped its flight ceiling from a max altitude of 60,000 feet down to 50,000 feet. The closer an aircraft is to an air defense system, the easier it is to detect and shoot down. In spite of this, the B-2 is still an incredibly stealthy and much beloved aircraft that has proven its worth in combat in multiple wars. But since we know the B-21 Raider's shape looks more like what Northrop had originally envisioned 30 years ago, we can now start to reverse engineer the types of missions and tactics that the new stealth bomber might use. We know it will probably have a higher 60,000 foot operation altitude. This means the B-21 Raider will be able to deploy its next generation advanced sensor of suites with an extreme line of sight, allowing it to grab information from the F-35 and new UAVs. It can act as a kind of rebroadcasting quarterback station, sending all of these updates in what's called a fused common battlefield picture. This is what distinguishes 6th generation aircraft from the older ones. They use enhanced sensors, artificial intelligence, network situational awareness, increased range, and longer range weapons alongside UAVs. So it's counterintuitive to think something half the size of its predecessor is actually an upgrade. The B-21 has a wingspan of just under 150 feet, around 20 feet shorter than its predecessor, the B-2 bomber. The B-21 will have 2 engines instead of 4. This means there will be trade-offs. The the B-21 will sacrifice half of its weapons payload. The old B-2 could carry 20 tons or 60,000 pounds of weapons payload, which amounts to about 80 of the 500-pound Mark 82 JDAM GPS-guided bombs and 2 of the GBU-57 bunker busters. The B-21 bomber has a reduced payload about half as large, 30,000 pounds. We know it has a requirement to be able to carry 1 GBU massive ordnance penetrator bunker buster, which weighs 30,000 pounds and can dive 61 meters deep into the earth. According to this Air Force white paper on long-range bomber strategy from 2001, even with standoff weapons like the AGM-86C with a range of 1,000 kilometers, bombers will still have to enter enemy airspace. And even starting from Guam, the last generation of bombers may be at the limits of refueling range. The Air Force claims the B-21 began development officially in 2011, but there's evidence that top-secret black budget funding began much earlier. In 2004, the Air Force's next-generation bomber program began, with no real expectation to actually field a new bomber platform until 2037. But 2 years later, in 2006, the Quadrennial Defense Review dropped. At the time, this was the main public document created by the Joint Chiefs of Staff that describes the overall United States military doctrine. This report required a new long-range bomber by 2018. This lit a huge fire under the Air Force's ass and sped up the expected timeline for a new bomber by 20 years. The DoD requested $1.4 billion in unclassified money for the development of this next-generation bomber. But Secretary of Defense Robert Gates pulled the plug and canceled the program, cutting funding for it because they couldn't figure out if it should be capable of unmanned flight or delivering nuclear weapons. Two things that are kind of trademarks and the whole point of a next-generation bomber today. It's interesting to note Defense Secretary Robert Gates was pulling the plug on all kinds of next-generation weapon systems that were meant to deter near peers at the time because we thought we were only going to fight insurgencies in the future. But many analysts like Bill Sweetman from Aviation Weekly believes funding was never actually cut and that this is when the classified black budget money kicked in for the B-21 bomber. According to documents released by Edward Snowden, the classified black budget for 2013 was $52.6 billion, equivalent to roughly the entire defense budget for the United Kingdom. Black budgets are an interesting and controversial concept. These systems are created under secret code names and hidden funding amounts known only to certain people in Congress, if at all. There are a few possible reasons why the B-21 was put under this black budget funding and continued in development even though it was officially canceled a few times. One reason is because the United States strategic bomber fleet is and was quickly aging at the time, made up of 76 of the B-52 Stratus forces, which are about on average 50 years old, and 63 of the B-1 bombers, which aren't stealthy, and there's only 20 of the B-2 stealth bombers, which are approximately 30 years old now. One of the possible problems with using old aircraft is your strategic bomber fleet starts to lose its stealth capabilities. The B-52 bombers, for instance, would possibly get shot down way before reaching their targets by the modern Russian-made S-400 anti-air system or the Chinese HQ-9B, both of which claim to be, by the book, a max detection range of around 600 kilometers and a max targeting range of 150 kilometers approximately. Even if we assume those numbers are greatly exaggerated, look at the max range of some of the munitions dropped by these American bombers. The Mark 84 GPS-guided JDAM, for instance, the most commonly dropped one, needs to get within 28 kilometers of the target. These anti-air systems can detect stealth aircraft, but its ability to get a good enough track to shoot down a B-21, for instance, out of the sky is questionable unless it gets close. So what kind of new tactics and doctrine do we expect the B-21 to deploy? China's investment in long-range cruise missiles over the past 20 years can now hit targets over 1,000 miles away. This makes bombers located at Guam and Japan vulnerable to attack while on the ground. Refueling tankers are slow-moving vulnerable targets. The B-21 Raider would be the only bomber capable of attacking long-range and deep into contested airspace to hit these mobile missile launchers and command centers. The B-21 Raider isn't your typical air support that the infantry calls in. These missions are carefully planned at high-up levels against the highest of value of targets. A few days prior to the unveiling of the B-21 bomber, the U.S. Air Force started their withdrawal of the F-15 fighter jets stationed at Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa, just 400 miles off the coast of China. The U.S. Air Force could be planning to rely on long-range bombers like the B-21 to replace these fighters with bomber aircraft. When bombers open their bomb bay doors, this greatly increases their radar signature because it breaks up the smooth shape. This is why the B-21 will be accompanied by drones that can jam enemy radar, scatter chaff, and draw attention away from these bomber runs. We've seen the way the B-21 is capable of swaying entire wars seemingly without breaking a sweat. The B-2 combat debut started in 1999 in the Kosovo War, destroying 33% of Serbian bombing targets and effectively ending the practice of carpet bombing by deploying the first GPS satellite-guided JDAM smart bombs.
The test objective was to attack the target area with 80 guided JDAM 500-pound weapons on a single pass with a single B-2 bomber. The weapons were all targeted to different aim points.
In the Iraq War, these bombers were an important part of the shock and awe bombing campaign that took out command and control centers, paving the way for the ground assault that followed. The B-2 bombers dropped 1.5 million pounds of munitions during the war, including 583 JDAMs just in 2003. The B-21 Raider is the kind of aircraft that takes out an entire airfield in order to enforce a no-fly zone. They flatten a whole enemy base. There's close air support, and then there's strategic bombing. A 2014 congressional research report that I found on the B-21 funding gives us a hint as to the black budget funding. We can see the funding explodes from just $258 million in 2013 to a planned $3 billion in 2019. This kind of massive, sudden exponential jump in funding indicates a spending pattern that closely resembles a program that's already in production. This is not what a development budget looks like. So what does this mean? A prototype long-range B-21 bomber was probably already fully in production as early as 2015, which was the same year that the contract for the B-21 bomber was won by Northrop Grumman. It's also when the B-21 was teased at the Super Bowl in case anyone was planning on buying a new Ford F-150 before casually grabbing their B-21. The entire program was worth an estimated $250 billion in total over 30 years of operations and development costs. And what do we get for that kind of money? One of the B-21's main increased abilities is its fuel efficiency, so it won't have to be based in theater, vulnerable to those incoming Chinese mobile ground-launched missiles. The B-21 could use a next-generation weapon like the Future Long-Range Standoff, the LRSO cruise missile, which would have a range of 2,500 kilometers. While that would put the aircraft well outside the range of these anti-air systems, the problem is each one of those missiles costs $13 million, compared to the $2,000 cost of a Mark 82 bomb that has a 28-kilometer range. The B-21 was built with all of the problems of the B-2 in mind. The main criticisms against the B-2 is that it costs $150,000 for every hour it's airborne, and it needed to spend 51 hours in maintenance for every hour in the sky. It required specialized temperature-controlled hangars, and its stealth abilities were wrecked when flying in the rain. All of this high maintenance led to the B-2 earning the nickname Hangar Queen. Hey, that was my nickname in high school. So gone are the days of the labor-intensive scraping away of radar-absorbing materials and coatings. Current RAM coatings, stealth coatings that are applied to the F-35 claim to absorb up to 80% of incoming radar waves. This of course has the drawback of an expensive, time-consuming maintenance process, but the B-21 Raider claims to have cut down on that. The B-21 is meant to be your everyday car. You can fly it every day, you can leave it outside in normal open-air hangar. One of the Raider's most important new features is its open system architecture, which I've seen these kind of systems showcased at trade shows. They're fascinating. The best way to think about it is how, you know, in the 1980s when you bought a Nintendo system, you couldn't really upgrade it, modify it, or give it a new graphics card to make it more powerful. Today, the B-21 is like a PC that you can update the drivers on it, you can add more memory, and modify the games. In order for the plan to work for the Air Force, you would need to be able to replace the entire bomber fleet, something that they failed to do with the B-2, because its cost ballooned to $2 billion per unit instead of the $440 million it was originally supposed to be. Part of that cost is likely from the last-minute requirement for a low-altitude capability that we mentioned earlier. So far, Northrop is staying on budget, although part of the program's cost could continue to be hidden in those black budgets. The military has a habit of trying to create a one-size-fits-all solution that will accomplish multiple different missions sort of okay, instead of one mission very well. This is classic weapons procurement problem that I see in everything from the development of rifles for grunts to stealth aircraft for pilots. The B-21 appears to have a purpose-built, specific design with a clear mission. The B-21 has incorporated many lessons learned, and all of the advances in technology have occurred since its predecessor, the B-2, was created. In many ways, engineers at Northrop Grumman were given the opportunity to manufacture the B-2 the way they had originally wanted the concept to function. But I'm interested to know what you guys think of the B-21. Let me know in the comments section if you want to see more aircraft rundowns. Follow me on Instagram for updates, Google Doc links to the script with updated research links. A big shout out to the Warzone.com, where I got most of this aviation information because I'm just your average infantryman. I don't know how stealth aircraft work.